All of our lives are subject to certain rules and laws. It doesn't matter whether it's on the road, when making a sale, or in our private lives. Practically every one of our actions is linked to a certain paragraph that defines the framework for what we are allowed to do and what we are not allowed to do. While these overriding established rules are now taken for granted by all of us, we should not ignore an intriguing question. What was the origin of those universal legal norms that regulate behavior within a society? If we want to know what the oldest legal collection in history is all about in detail, we have to turn back the wheel of time by a full 4,000 years to the era of the venerable Sumerians. What we know about their ancient codex, UR-NAMMU, what mysteries surround the ancient law, and what other Sumerian achievements we draw on to this day, we'll tell you now. Before we get started, be sure to hit the like button and ring the notification bell for more videos. Also, stick around until the end to learn one of the best-kept secrets of the Sumerians. The Sumerians, a people full of mysteries. Even if the Sumerians are still accompanied by many unsolved mysteries today, one thing is certain: if the ancient ethnic group had not existed, the entire history of mankind would have taken a different course. In fact, the Sumerians are considered the first people in history to have taken the step towards high culture. In detail, this means social orders that are characterized above all by their special inner complexity. In particular, the development of cuneiform writing is one of the most groundbreaking achievements of the Sumerians, which is considered to be the origin of our writing systems that are still in use today. But the introduction of bureaucracy and the development of artificial irrigation are also among the Sumerian milestones that should pave the way to more modern times. The people owe their name to the region of Sumer in southern Mesopotamia, which served as their permanent home in the 3rd millennium BC. However, the name of the Sumerians, which is still common today, would not appear until many decades later. It was then that old Babylonian rulers began to refer to themselves as kings of Sumer, in the same breath giving a new name to the area's previous inhabitants. The Sumerians still referred to themselves as Sagia, which loosely translated means something like the black-headed. However, it is not known where the Sumerians originally came from. In this regard, two different theories have emerged among the experts. On the one hand, it's conceivable that the Sumerians developed elsewhere and only later immigrated to their eponymous homeland. However, this thesis is supported by a certain similarity of the Sumerian language with others such as Finnish, Turkish, and Hungarian. The origin of these languages is in turn mostly located in the Ural steppes, which would mean, conversely, that this was also the first homeland of the Sumerians. Since this thesis, which seeks to decipher the origin of the Sumerians based on their language, is contentiously contestable, other historians believe that the Sumerians were a locally resident people. Economy and invention of cuneiform writing. A look at the economic system of the Sumerians shows that the common good of the people was the top priority. So not every resident worked for himself, but made the cultivated crops available to the general public or to the temple, which stored and distributed the harvest. This form of general stockpiling was ultimately to bring with it certain administrative complications, which is likely what ultimately led to the invention of writing. At the beginning, the corresponding goods of the citizens were still sealed with simple lumps of clay, on which the number of stored goods was marked. The seals were later supplemented by stamp seals from high-ranking officials and religious dignitaries. Eventually, however, there came a time when this system reached its limits. This happened around the year 3300 BC. A severe water shortage that forced the ancient Sumerians to develop novel irrigation systems and retention basins to ensure continued water supplies for agriculture during this trying time. The complicated management of the scarce water resources could no longer be handled simply with stamp seals, so this phase of the crisis probably represents the epoch in which the Sumerians developed their first characters. For comparison, the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs were not to appear until around 200 years later. In the centuries that followed, the Sumerian cuneiform script finally spilled over into the ranks of other ethnic groups. where it was adapted, further developed, and used for a total of more than 3,000 years. Initially, it was still purely pictorial writing that included around 900 ideograms and pictograms, such as simple depictions of mountains, jugs, or arrows. Many later characters were created by combining or merging some of these pictograms. So the word for crying was simply expressed by the two symbols for eye and water. Other signs, unambiguous at first glance, also had a second meaning. For example, the pictogram for grasshopper not only stood for the actual insect, but also for annihilation. The Sumerians probably alluded to destroyed gardens and fields that had fallen victim to ravenous swarms of locusts. In the past, it was also believed that the Sumerians invented the wagon wheel and the potter's wheel. However, they are no longer considered the creators of these groundbreaking achievements. What is certain, however, is that the corresponding inventions had a significant influence on the culture and economy of the Sumerians. What's noteworthy is the fact that the Sumerian population was able to enjoy a fairly high standard of living. Although the Sumerians themselves actually had hardly any raw materials, the members of the people achieved their prosperity primarily through trading with other groups. Grains, clay works, and domesticated cattle were particularly popular at the time. In fact, these Sumerian goods were held in such high esteem in the rest of the world that they were exported as far away as India. Codex UR-NAMMU. As we already mentioned at the beginning, the Codex UR-NAMMU is considered to be the oldest legal collection that has been handed down in writing. However, the original legal text is no longer preserved. All that archaeologists were able to salvage over time were 5 copies in all, written in Old Babylonian, but none of them have survived in their entirety. So, although many passages of the Codex UR-NAMMU were lost, those parts that could be found and examined paint a rather revealing picture of how detailed the daily life of the Sumerians was already regulated thousands of years ago. It's generally assumed that the original version of the legal collection dates back to around the year 2100 BC. It was probably the eponymous king UR-NAMMU or his son Skolgi who initiated the production of the codex. According to the experts' reconstruction, the Codex UR-NAMMU was structured in different sections. For example, an inscription dedicated to a deity, which adorns the statue, or stele containing the legal document, is an essential characteristic. The official announcement of the incumbent ruler was also immortalized there. In this way, the king could advance to become a powerful ruler, either through divine will or through his political successes. The enactment of the laws said, among other things, that every citizen should be treated equally. In addition, the Codex UR-NAMMU was also cursed to protect the inscription. The most exciting thing about this ancient collection of laws, however, are the laws contained within it. It's not known what the size of the codex was like around 4,000 years ago, but today it still contains around 40 paragraphs. While we just told you that every Sumerian citizen should be treated equally before the law, not every resident had citizen status. Thus, the Codex UR-NAMMU distinguishes between 2 classes of people, namely the commoners and the slaves. Topics covered in the collection of laws sometimes include robbery, adultery, assault, murder, inheritance, and medical expenses. But witchcraft, renting cattle and land, and slave rights are also discussed in the Codex UR-NAMMU. A glance at the penalties that awaited those who committed a capital offense makes it clear that the Sumerians were not squeamish in the application of their laws. Serious offenses such as robbery, assault, or murder were punished with death. If a citizen was accused of witchcraft, a so-called river order was to decide the guilt or innocence of the accused. The victim was thrown into the water and tied up. If he then sank down, he was considered innocent. However, if the person were to float back to the top of the water unscathed, he or she would be considered guilty. Similar circumstances and trials were carried out during the Salem witch trials thousands of years later. Those whose offenses were not quite as serious were in turn sentenced to prison terms or fines. The individual laws were always written in the if-then form. For example, one of those laws reads, if a man commits murder, then he must be killed. Or a little less draconian, if a citizen dies and has no son, then the inheritance should pass to an unmarried daughter. While many of these generally applicable legal norms regarding murder, robbery, and false accusations also appear in our current laws, other rules and regulations of the Sumerians can be derived from the climatic conditions of their homeland at that time. Accordingly, for example, the theft of water and the neglect of one's own field were punishable. The background to this was that water was very scarce in the region in question. Moreover, the economy of the entire Sumerian people was mainly based on agriculture. The gods of the Sumerians. It may shock you to know that the Sumerians, unlike many civilizations, would worship human-like gods. We know that a lot of humans around this time would worship inanimate objects like the sun, the clouds, the moon, or other objects. The Sumerians had different beliefs though. They would worship a series of gods that they claimed were in control of everything on the earth. They would worship On, the sky god, Enki, the creator of the earth, and Enlil, the god of wind. They also worshiped NAMMU, who is considered to be the source of all life. They also claimed that ANUNNA was the name of a divine council of elders. The Sumerians claimed that the ANUNNAKI were members of this council and would oversee everything humanity did or created. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Were the Anunnaki more than gods? A French archaeologist named Paul-Émile Botta was the first man to excavate the remains of a Sumerian city. He visited an area near Iraq in a location that is now known as Khorsabad. He was on a mission to locate and document various locations that were mentioned in the Bible, and the lost cities of the Sumerians were first on his list. In the remnants of the city that had long been covered in sand, mud, and dirt, he found 14 tablets that many people believe are the first historical documents ever written by man. These tablets were truly incredible, but it would take several decades before we would be able to understand the story that these tablets told. Of the tablets, a few would contradict each other, calling into question the validity of their content. The tablets showed images of humans, as well as giant beings that were called the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki were surrounded by much smaller people, but we don't know if these individuals were meant to represent humans or servants of the Anunnaki. The images show humans carrying around goods in baskets, much like other cave paintings or clay drawings from similar time periods. The tablets also tell the story of a sudden shift in Sumerian culture, when leaders are appointed to oversee the people and rule over the land. Historians have never been able to explain this strange leap in human development. What would cause these free people to suddenly decide to elect leaders to rule over them? If everything was going well for the Sumerians, as it seems it was, why would there ever be a need for a leader? It's clear to see that there is still a lot about the Sumerians that we simply don't know. Hopefully, future excavations will shed more light on this strange culture of people, but chances are, most of Sumerian history has now been lost to time. Now it's your turn. What are your thoughts on the ancient Sumerians and the Codex UR-NAMMU? Let us know in the comments. Please give us a thumbs up if you liked today's video. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be kept up to date from now on. Thanks for watching. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.